I want you to picture a scenario.
Okay.
You are sitting in this totally sterile, slightly too cold room. You know the kind.
Yeah. Fluorescent lights buzzing.
Exactly. The lights overhead have this faint, just maddening hum to them. And across this cheap laminate desk sits an examiner.
Right.
And they look incredibly tired. They're holding a clipboard like it's a shield. And there is a digital timer aggressively ticking down the seconds right there on the desk between you.
That is basically a nightmare scenario.
It is.
Yeah.
And they've just looked up from their papers, made direct eye contact, and asked you this deeply complex, incredibly philosophical question.
Something totally out of left field.
Right. Something terrifying. Like, how do you believe artificial intelligence will fundamentally alter the fabric of human empathy?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the silence just hangs in the air. It stretches out.
Yeah.
And suddenly you feel it, that sheer icy panic just creeping up your spine.
Yeah. The throat tightens up.
Exactly. Your palms are sweating because you feel this overwhelming, crushing pressure to deliver a perfectly constructed, flawless, academically rigorous English response.
Which is impossible, by the way.
Right. But you feel like any pause, any tiny grammatical mistake, or even a hint of hesitation is going to completely ruin your chances of ever passing.
Well, and that paralysis you're describing, it isn't just a mental block. It is a full-blown physiological fight or flight response.
Really? Like literally biological?
Oh, absolutely. The pressure cooker environment of a high-stakes exam room completely strips away your confidence, and it effectively hijacks your prefrontal cortex.
That's the logic part of the brain.
Right. The logical language-producing part of your brain, it just shuts down. So in that moment, you're not really just being tested on your vocabulary anymore.
You feel like your whole worth is on trial.
Exactly. You feel as though your fundamental competence, your very ability to think critically and articulate yourself as a functioning human being is being judged.
And the tragic irony here is that the harder you try to be perfect in that moment, the worse you actually perform.
100%.
So today, for our deep dive, we are tackling this incredibly revealing piece of source material. It's an excerpt from a masterclass, and it's called Mastering C2 English: Advanced Strategies for Native Fluency.
It's a fascinating text.
It really is. But our mission today isn't just about language tests, It's to completely deconstruct the central premise of this material, which is what they call the illusion of effortless fluency.
Right, because effortless fluency is definitely an illusion.
So we have an expert guide with us today to help navigate the fascinating psychology and the strategy behind all this, because whether you're trying to pass massive gatekeeper exams like the IELTS or TOEFL or the Cambridge C2.
Or even just, trying to impress a hiring manager in a high-stakes corporate interview.
Exactly. Success is absolutely not about robotic perfection.
No, in fact, striving for robotic perfection is the single biggest trap a communicator can fall into.
So what's the alternative then?
Well, the true goal, which our source material lays out so brilliantly through all these vivid metaphors, is mastering highly sophisticated linguistic strategies.
Right, and we're going to get into those metaphors they use, like anatomy, geometry.
Carpentry, fine art. It's really rich imagery. And the essence of this entire paradigm shift is realizing that supreme fluency is not about how you magically avoid making mistakes entirely.
Because everyone makes mistakes.
Right. It is entirely about the grace, the strategy, and the mechanics of how you handle those mistakes and recover from them naturally.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because I think anyone who has ever tried to learn a second language, or even just anyone who's frozen up during a crucial presentation at work, they need to hear the mechanics of this recovery.
It's a lifesaver.
We need to figure out how to stop sounding like a memorized walking textbook and start sounding genuinely, natively fluent.
Absolutely.
And to do that, our source material forces us to start by stepping into the mind of the one person holding all the power in that terrifying room, which is the examiner.
Yeah, the psychology of the examiner is the absolute bedrock of understanding how to communicate effectively under pressure.
Because we usually just see them as the enemy. Right?
Exactly. Test takers and really anyone stepping into any evaluation scenario, they tend to project this aura of absolute emotionless authority onto the person across the table.
Like they're a robot.
Right. We imagine them as these algorithmic grading machines just scanning for errors, but the reality is far more grounded. I mean, first and foremost, they're just exhausted.
Exhausted. That detail fundamentally changes the dynamic.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. The person judging you isn't a machine. They're someone who probably hasn't had enough coffee, and just desperately wants the day to end.
Think about the sheer cognitive fatigue of their job. They sit in that exact same identical chair day after day, week after week, listening to thousands of highly anxious people deliver the exact same heavily rehearsed robotic answers.
Oh man, that sounds agonizing.
It is. If you ask 400 people to describe their hometown and 399 of them give you a memorized Wikipedia summary,
Delivered in a totally flat, nervous monotone.
exactly. Your brain naturally just tunes out. The examiner is desperately craving authenticity.
They want a real person.
Right. They are begging for a spark of genuine human interaction just to break up the monotony.
So to achieve a top score, what the language testing world calls a band 9, the student absolutely has to shatter that robotic pattern.
They have to break the mold.
And for anyone listening who might not be deep into the testing jargon, a band 9 is essentially the Olympic gold medal of English proficiency. It means you're considered totally indistinguishable from a highly educated native speaker.
Which leads to a massive paradigm-shifting concept from our material.
Which is?
Native speakers do not actually have perfect grammar all the time.
See, now wait, let me push back on this a little bit.
Go ahead.
Because if you're telling me that native speakers aren't perfectly accurate, why do test takers obsess over perfection so much?
That's a great question.
Right. I mean, why is the entire language learning industry, all the textbooks, all the apps, built entirely around highlighting your errors with red ink? They penalize you for every misplaced preposition, but you're saying native speakers are constantly making those same errors.
What's fascinating here is the way formal education completely misrepresents the organic nature of human conversation.
How so?
Well, test takers obsess over perfection because textbooks teach rules, and rules are inherently binary. They're either 100% right or 100% wrong.
Right, you get a red X if you mess up the verb tense.
Exactly. If you write the wrong verb tense in a workbook, you get a red X. But conversation doesn't exist in a workbook.
Right.
True fluency isn't the absence of errors. It is the sophisticated art of recovery.
Ah, recovery.
Yes. It is how a speaker smooths over a grammatical stumble, how they buy themselves thinking time when they're confused, and how they naturally build an argument even when they are entirely unsure of their footing.
So they are basically maintaining the illusion of effortlessness.
Exactly.
They're stumbling, but they know how to turn a stumble into like a dance step so the audience never actually realizes they tripped.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. Native speakers are masters of conversational sleight of hand.
Sleight of hand. I love that.
They redirect attention away from the error and just keep the momentum moving forward.
You know, this applies to so much more than just a C2 exam. If you are listening right now and you're prepping for a massive international job interview, or maybe you're pitching a startup to investors.
Or even just trying to hold your own at a sophisticated dinner party.
Totally. Realizing that absolute perfection is a myth completely changes the game. It takes that crushing pressure right off your chest.
It frees you up.
It means you can stop trying to process information like a flawless supercomputer and actually start focusing on strategy. Like, you are allowed to be human.
And being human requires vulnerability and spontaneity, which is exactly what test takers try to eliminate when they get nervous.
Because spontaneity feels dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. The source material categorizes the ways people fail to be human under pressure, starting with the introductory phases of a conversation.
The text calls these the sins of artificiality.
Yes, the sins of artificiality. When people are nervous, they fall back on what feels safe, which usually means memorization and blind repetition.
Which brings us to the first brilliant metaphor from our source material to describe this artificiality. We dive into the animal kingdom with the concept of parroting an answer.
The avian metaphor is wonderfully precise here.
Because parrots are famous for mimicking human speech.
Right. A parrot can perfectly replicate the phonetic sounds, the pitch, and sometimes even the exact tone of a human voice.
But the crucial distinction is that the parrot possesses absolutely zero cognitive comprehension of the words it is producing.
None at all.
It is merely reproducing audio frequencies. Like when a parrot says, "Good morning, how are you?" It isn't actually inquiring about your well-being.
No, it is just playing a tape recorder.
Right. So when we apply this idiomatically to a human being in a high-stakes conversation, to parrot, an answer means a person is mechanically regurgitating a phrase or an opinion or a statistic that they have memorized from a textbook or a website.
Without contributing a single drop of original thought.
None.
And crucially, they strip the delivery of all natural emotional intonation. Because the thought doesn't actually belong to them, they can't organically inflect the words.
The text warns that an examiner can spot parroting instantly, right?
Oh, instantly. Any perceptive listener, like a hiring manager, can hear it. It creates this uncanny valley effect.
The uncanny valley. Yes, the words are technically correct, but the soul of the communication is just entirely absent.
A great example of this from the text. Imagine an interviewer asking something basic, like, tell me about where you grew up.
Okay.
And instead of a natural response, the candidate parrots a Wikipedia entry. They sit up totally straight, their eyes glaze over, and they say, my hometown was established in 1842 and has a current metropolitan population of 450,000 residents.
With a primary economic focus on textile manufacturing.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh, you can practically see the exhausted examiner mentally checking out the moment that sentence begins.
Right, because it doesn't tell them anything about the person's actual language ability. It only shows their ability to memorize a script.
It's the antithesis of a genuine conversation.
It really is.
So the strategy to combat parroting is to inject personal narrative. A personal story inherently requires original thought, spontaneous emotional intonation, and a natural, uneven rhythm.
Stuff a memorized script simply cannot replicate.
Exactly. But parroting isn't the only sin of artificiality we fall into when we're nervous. There is another massive penalty to the illusion of fluency, which involves getting trapped in your own limited vocabulary.
This moves us from the biological mimicry of the parrot to a fantastic vintage audio metaphor.
Right. Sounding like a broken record.
Yeah.
I find it so interesting how our language preserves the technology of past eras through idioms. Like, for anyone listening who didn't grow up dealing with analog music, a broken record refers to physical vinyl discs.
Right, before Spotify.
Way before. Music used to be physically carved into a long, continuous spiral groove on a piece of vinyl. And if that record got scratched,
the physical needle of the record player would hit the scratch, jump backward, and get trapped in a single isolated loop of the groove.
And it would just play the exact same 3 seconds of audio over and over and over again, endlessly.
Until someone walked over and physically moved the needle.
How annoying.
Very. So idiomatically, sounding like a broken record means you are trapping your listener in that exact same agonizing scratching loop.
You're leaning on the same crutch word.
Exactly. Or repeating the exact same argumentative point so many times that it transitions from being slightly noticeable to actively maddening.
It's like when someone answers every single question by saying, well, it's very important because, and then the next question is, yes, that is also very important. And then the most important thing is.
Yes. You are just hammering the listener with the same blunt instrument.
And what does this expose to an examiner?
It exposes a severe lack of what the testing world calls lexical resource.
Okay, let's define that. Because lexical resource sounds like something you'd, I don't know, mine out of a mountain.
It does sound industrial, but in simple terms, your lexical resource is the size and variety of your vocabulary tool belt.
Yeah.
It is the palette of colors you have available to paint with. If you only have red and blue, every painting is going to look exactly the same.
Right.
If you only know the word important, you are forced to be a broken record. To achieve a band 9, you have to show the examiner that you have access to a vast, nuanced palette.
So you need to seamlessly swap important for like crucial or vital.
Or significant, paramount,
Right.
indispensable.
Nice. So parroting is stealing someone else's words without understanding them. And sounding like a broken record is getting trapped in a repetitive loop of your own limited vocabulary.
Precisely. Both are symptoms of over-preparation colliding with nervous anxiety.
But this raises a really fascinating dilemma. Because if those are the traps we fall into when we've prepared...
What happens when preparation completely catastrophically fails you?
Exactly. What on earth do we do then?
This is where the strategies become universally applicable to any high-pressure situation, because the material transitions into dealing with abstract, impossible-to-predict questions.
The curveballs.
The major curveballs.
Going back to our initial scenario, this is the moment the examiner asks, how will artificial intelligence alter the fabric of human empathy?
Just a casual question.
Right. If a friend asked me that over coffee on a Tuesday, my brain would probably freeze while I tried to formulate an answer. But in a sterile room with a timer ticking and my entire future depending on it.
The cognitive shutdown would be absolute.
Shutdown.
And that shutdown is exactly what we need to dissect. We are moving into the mechanics of navigating cognitive failures. And the material distinguishes between two very specific, very different types of mental freezing.
Starting with the concept of drawing a blank.
Yes.
Drawing a blank.
Which is an incredibly evocative visual metaphor rooted in art and paper. I want you to imagine being handed a large, pristine, completely white canvas.
Okay.
The instructor hands you a paintbrush and says, paint me a picture of historical environmental policies in the 1970s.
And you stare at the canvas and your mind is an absolute void.
A void. You have zero data. So your hand doesn't move and the canvas remains entirely physically blank.
It is sudden, complete amnesia regarding a topic. You don't have the vocabulary, you don't have the conceptual knowledge. There's simply nothing in the archives to retrieve.
But the material contrasts drawing a blank with a second type of cognitive failure, which I actually think is significantly more agonizing to experience.
Oh, without a doubt.
And that is having something on the tip of your tongue. This is a highly physical sensory metaphor for a specific neurological phenomenon known as phonological blocking.
Phonological blocking.
Okay.
That implies the information is there, but the pathway is just obstructed.
Precisely. Unlike drawing a blank, where the archive is completely empty,
right?
The tip of the tongue phenomenon, you know the word perfectly well. You know its definition. You know what letter it starts with.
You might even know exactly how many syllables it has.
Exactly. You can feel the shape of the word in your mind, but your brain simply refuses to deliver the final neurological signal to your vocal cords and mouth to actually articulate it.
It's maddening. It is literally sitting right there, balanced on the physical tip of your tongue, ready to jump off, but it is glued down.
It really is the worst feeling.
It's like trying to remember the name of a very famous actor. And you can see their face. You can name 3 movies they were in. You know, their first name starts with an M.
But the actual name just will not manifest.
To conceptualize the difference between these two failures, I like to use a technology analogy. To me, drawing a blank is what happens when your computer suffers a catastrophic hard crash.
The screen goes completely black.
Right. There is no power. There is no data. There is just a dark void staring back at you.
A total system failure.
Exactly. But having something on the tip of your tongue is not a black screen. It is that infuriating little spinning loading wheel.
Oh, I hate that wheel.
We all do.
Yeah.
You know the file exists on the hard drive. You can literally see the icon on your desktop. But you double-click it, and the wheel just spins and spins and spins. The document refuses to open.
That is a brilliant distinction. One is a fundamental lack of information. The other is a temporary failure of retrieval.
But here is the most important takeaway from our source material regarding both the black screen and the spinning wheel. They are entirely biologically natural.
Yes. Even the most educated native speakers in the world draw blanks.
Even seasoned public speakers get the spinning wheel on the tip of their tongues.
However, and this is a massive non-negotiable rule in the masterclass, there is one fatal error you can make when these cognitive failures occur.
Which is?
Dead silence. Dead silence will absolutely destroy your fluency score.
It is the ultimate fluency killer.
Yeah.
If you sit there staring at the examiner with wide, panicked eyes while your brain tries to reboot, the illusion of effortlessness shatters completely.
Because the examiner cannot read your mind.
Right.
They don't know if you were just taking a moment to formulate a brilliant philosophical thesis on artificial intelligence, or if you simply don't understand the English words they just spoke to you.
Silence creates this unbearable vacuum of ambiguity.
So you are trapped in this terrible paradox.
You don't have the answer yet, but you are strictly forbidden from sitting in silence to find it.
Right.
So how do we escape this? How do native speakers handle a black screen or a spinning loading wheel without freezing the conversation?
They pivot. And they do so strategically by understanding the economics of conversation.
The economics.
Yes. They deploy sophisticated filler phrases to do what the material calls buy time.
To buy time. Let's look closely at this financial metaphor because the text explicitly argues that in a high-stakes conversation, time is quite literally a currency.
It is the perfect way to frame it. Think of silence as a massive debt that you simply cannot afford to take on.
Okay.
If your brain needs 10 seconds of processing power to unearth the answer about artificial intelligence, you cannot just steal those 10 seconds from your listener by making them sit in awkward silence.
Right, you can't just take it.
You have to purchase those seconds from them. You have to offer them something of value in exchange for their patience.
And the currency you use to purchase those seconds is smooth, structurally complex, beautifully articulated filler language.
Exactly. Let's look at the actual mechanics of how this works.
Okay, lay it on me.
Instead of panicking in silence, A master communicator will lean back, maintain relaxed eye contact, and say, that is a highly complex question. To be perfectly honest, I have never actually considered the issue from that specific angle before, but if I had to venture a guess.
Wow. Let's put that sentence under a microscope.
Let's do it.
What factual, substantive information did that speaker just provide regarding the topic of artificial intelligence?
Absolutely zero. Mathematically, they have contributed nothing to the actual prompt.
Nothing at all. But look at the heavy lifting that empty sentence just accomplished. First, it is grammatically flawless.
Yep.
Second, it utilizes advanced lexical resources, words like complex, considered, and venture.
Right.
Third, the tone makes the speaker sound deeply thoughtful, reflective, and engaged with the prompt.
And most importantly, delivering that sentence slowly and deliberately buys the speaker anywhere from 5 to 10 seconds of conversational breathing room.
It is absolute conversational sleight of hand.
It really is.
You are distracting the audience with this beautiful, flowing, perfectly pronounced English in the foreground, while behind the curtain, in the background, your brain is frantically sprinting through the filing cabinets trying to find the actual answer.
And you maintain the illusion of total control.
Yeah.
You never break character.
This is the very essence of native fluency.
It is. It's not about possessing an encyclopedic knowledge of everything. It is the strategic mastery of never letting the listener realize that you don't know something immediately.
It's the graceful paddle of a duck's feet, hidden beneath the calm surface of the water.
Exactly. But
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because you can only paddle underwater for so long.
right, you can't buy time forever.
You can't just string together 5 minutes of meaningless filler phrases. Eventually, the check comes due, and you have to deliver the actual substance of the answer.
Correct. And the masterclass explains that once you have successfully bought your time and your brain finally retrieves the core idea, you cannot just throw that idea onto the table as a single, isolated sentence. You have to build it into a compelling narrative. To explain this construction process, the material introduces a rather visceral, anatomical metaphor.
To flesh something out.
To flesh something out.
It is a slightly macabre but undeniably effective visual. Imagine an anatomy classroom. In the corner stands a bare, white, human skeleton.
It is stark, rigid, and entirely devoid of life.
Exactly. In this metaphor, the bare skeleton represents your core idea, your main thesis. It is the structural foundation of your answer.
Right.
You absolutely need it so the body doesn't collapse, but on its own, it is incredibly boring to look at. To turn that skeleton into a real, living, breathing entity, you have to physically add layers to it.
You must add the muscle.
You must add the connective tissue, you have to stretch the skin over it, you have to literally add flesh to the bones.
Translating this anatomical process into verbal communication, fleshing out an answer, means taking a bare skeletal statement and layering it with rich, supporting details, specific anecdotes, secondary examples, and nuanced explanations to give it real substance.
Think about how this applies to a standard job interview.
Okay.
The interviewer asks, "What do you consider your greatest professional strength?" If you simply reply, "I am very good at managing teams," you have just handed them a dry skeleton.
Yes. It is technically a complete sentence. Yes, it answers the prompt, but it is dead on arrival.
It gives the interviewer nothing to engage with.
Nothing. To flesh that skeleton out, you must add the muscle.
So how would you do that?
You follow up that skeletal statement by saying, for example, last year I took over a project where 2 departments were completely siloed and refusing to communicate. I implemented a weekly cross-functional workshop that not only resolved the tension, but increased our overall output by 20%.
Now the answer has a heartbeat. You have brought the idea to life.
This is critical for demonstrating advanced language proficiency because it proves you have depth to your communication skills, not just the breadth to state simple facts.
It's to sustain a complex thought. But as we move into the next major concept in our deep dive, the source material starts flashing a massive warning light.
Yes, there is a very dangerous, very common trap hidden within the fleshing out process.
Then what's that?
While adding detail to the skeleton is absolutely necessary for a high score, if you lack strategic discipline, you run the risk of creating a monster.
A monster.
Yeah, you add too much uncontrolled detail, you lose sight of the original skeleton entirely, and your answer collapses under its own weight.
Which brings us to the collision of mathematical discipline and master craftsmanship. It isn't just about talking abundantly, it is about talking with absolute precision.
Right.
And to explain what happens when we lose that precision, we leave the anatomy lab and step into the realm of geometry with the metaphor, to go off on a tangent.
This is a vital concept for anyone wanting to be taken seriously as a communicator. It's all about conversational discipline.
Let's visualize this geometry metaphor exactly as it works in mathematics. Imagine a perfect, closed, perfectly drawn circle on a piece of paper.
Okay, got it.
That circle represents the specific topic or question you have been asked to address. Now, a tangent in geometry is a perfectly straight line that comes in, touches the outer edge of that circle at one single microscopic point, and then immediately shoots off into infinite space.
Traveling further and further away from the circle forever.
Right. It never curves back around. It just disappears into the void.
So, idiomatically, to go off on a tangent, means you begin answering a question, you manage to touch upon one tiny peripheral detail related to the prompt.
That single point of contact on the circle.
Right, and then you suddenly abandon the main topic entirely to talk endlessly and passionately about that unrelated detail.
The example of this from the material is an absolute classic. Imagine the examiner asks a question about the infrastructure of public transportation.
Okay.
The prompt is public transportation. That is the circle. The student starts by saying that taking the city bus is much better for reducing greenhouse gas emissions than driving a personal car.
Okay, they are on the edge of the circle. They are touching the topic.
But then, the student says, speaking of cars, I have always been deeply passionate about fast cars. My absolute dream car is a vintage Porsche 911, specifically because the rear engine layout provides this incredible handling dynamic on tight corners.
And suddenly they are moving at the speed of light into infinite space.
They have completely abandoned the public transportation circle and are now giving a masterclass on German automotive engineering.
And the material makes it incredibly explicit. Evaluators despise this.
I bet.
It absolutely decimates your score for the specific criteria of coherence.
Because true fluency isn't just the mechanical ability to produce a high volume of English words. It is the cognitive ability to produce words that are relevant to the prompt you were given.
Going off on a tangent proves to the examiner that you lack the mental discipline to control your own narrative steering wheel.
It's the equivalent of adding so much unorganized flesh to the skeleton that it loses all human shape and just becomes an unrecognizable sprawling blob on the floor.
Oh, but yes, you must have structural integrity.
And to counter the danger of the tangent, to teach us how to maintain that required structure and precision, the material introduces what I consider the ultimate carpentry metaphor, to hit the nail on the head.
I love this one because the physical stakes are so clear.
Yes. If you are a carpenter building a piece of fine furniture and you are swinging a heavy steel hammer, your margin for error is virtually zero.
The physics of the action demand absolute accuracy. You do not want to strike the soft wood surrounding the nail because you will leave a massive, ugly dent in the project you were trying to build.
And you definitely, absolutely do not want to miss the nail entirely and smash your own thumb.
No, you do not. What you want, what the master craftsman achieves, is for the massive, heavy head of the hammer to strike the tiny, flat, metallic top of the nail with absolute, flawless, dead center accuracy.
Driving it perfectly and cleanly straight into the wood in a single powerful motion.
Beautiful. So in the context of advanced conversation, to hit the nail on the head means you have achieved that exact level of flawless precision with your words.
You haven't waffled around the edges of the topic.
Right, you haven't dented the wood by being vague.
And you certainly haven't smashed your thumb by going off on a bizarre tangent about a Porsche.
Exactly. You have identified a complex problem or answered a deeply difficult question with exactitude. You said precisely the right thing at precisely the right time.
Like, if the examiner asks about the primary failing of modern education, and the student cleanly and powerfully articulates that the system prioritizes rote memorization over the development of adaptable practical life skills.
The examiner mentally nods and thinks, yes, they hit the nail perfectly on the head.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we can truly appreciate the incredible balancing act that this masterclass is demanding of a C2 level speaker.
It's a lot to juggle.
It is. A natively fluent speaker is essentially someone who can masterfully juggle two opposing forces in real time. They must be creative enough to organically flesh out their skeletal ideas with rich, engaging detail, while simultaneously maintaining the rigid geometric discipline to ensure they never go off on a tangent.
Guaranteeing that their final concluding point always hits the nail on the head.
Exactly.
It really is a high wire act.
Yeah.
You have to be Expansive, yet entirely disciplined. You have to be highly creative, yet surgically accurate.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the absolute climax of our source material today. We have covered how to survive the initial terror of the room.
We know how to buy time when our brains crash.
Right. We know how to flesh out a skeleton without flying off into space. But what elevates an answer from simply being correct to being truly, unforgettably masterclass?
How do you achieve the absolute pinnacle display of lexical resource?
Exactly. To describe this ultimate level of fluency, the material leaves behind the clinical realms of anatomy and the rigid rules of geometry and carpentry, and it enters the subjective, beautiful world of fine art with our final phrase.
To paint a picture.
To paint a picture. I want to dissect this artistic metaphor carefully because the text draws a brilliant, stark contrast here.
It does.
It argues that an amateur communicator, someone who is just trying to survive the interaction, gives their listener raw data.
They hand over a spreadsheet of facts.
Much like our earlier examples of the parrot regurgitating the hometown population, or the broken record repeating the same basic adjective.
But a master communicator doesn't give you data. They give you a painting.
At this level, words cease to be mere utilitarian carriers of information. They transform into tools of creation.
Wow.
To paint a picture with your language means to describe a scenario, a memory, or a concept so vividly, utilizing such a rich, textured tapestry of specific vocabulary, evocative adjectives, and sensory details that the listener's brain is forced to render the scene.
They can literally see the environment unfolding in their mind's eye.
The mind's eye, it is the exact polar opposite of the blank canvas we talked about earlier.
Right. When you draw a blank, you are paralyzed by a void. But when you paint a picture, you are actively creating a masterpiece inside the examiner's imagination, replacing their sterile, fluorescent-lit room with your own constructed reality.
The example provided in the text to illustrate this difference is magnificent.
Oh, the hometown one.
Yeah. Imagine the prompt asks the candidate to describe their childhood home. The amateur, handing over the bare skeleton of data, might say, "My house was nice. It was located in the center of a very big city. It was usually quite busy."
Which answers the prompt, but it is entirely forgettable.
Entirely. But a master speaker, someone who is effortlessly operating at that band 9 level, will take those exact same underlying facts and paint a picture.
They will say something like, I grew up right in the pulsating heart of the city, surrounded by these incredibly vibrant, endlessly noisy, bustling street markets. The air outside my bedroom window always carried this heavy, warm, comforting smell of fresh bread from the bakery downstairs.
I can literally see it. I can hear the chaotic noise of the market. I can practically smell the yeast and the warmth of the bread. It transports you.
It completely changes the experience for the listener.
And I want you, the listener, to pause whatever you are doing right now and deeply reflect on your own daily communication habits, even in your native language.
Think about it.
When you are telling your partner about your day or pitching an idea to your team, are you just handing them a pile of dry, skeletal bones? Are you just dropping raw data and spreadsheets onto their lap?
Or are you taking the time and utilizing the vocabulary to paint a vibrant, compelling picture for them?
Because that right there is the fundamental difference between simply speaking words and truly, deeply communicating.
It entirely elevates the dynamic of the interaction. When you paint a picture, the examiner is no longer an exhausted, cynical grader sitting across from a robotic test taker.
Right, they become an audience member.
Actively captivated by a storyteller. And that is the moment you entirely shatter the illusion of the exam room.
So what does this all mean? We have gone on an absolutely epic, fascinating journey through this masterclass material today. Let's recap the roadmap we've uncovered for mastering the illusion of fluency.
Let's do it.
We started by walking into that terrifying, sterile exam room, realizing that our very first act of survival is abandoning the false safety of parroting memorized textbook answers.
And avoiding the trap of sounding like a broken record with our vocabulary.
We learn to forgive ourselves for cognitive failures, understanding that drawing a blank or having a word stuck on the tip of our tongue are natural human phenomena, not fatal flaws.
Yes. When our brains inevitably freeze, when we get the black screen of a blank mind or the spinning loading wheel of phonological blocking, we do not surrender to the fluency-destroying void of dead silence.
Never surrender to silence.
Instead, we strategically purchase our survival by deploying smooth, sophisticated filler phrases to buy the time our brains need to recover.
And once we buy that precious time and find our core idea, we take that bare, boring skeleton and we meticulously flesh it out, adding the muscle and life of rich, supporting details.
All while desperately maintaining our geometric and mathematical discipline, ensuring our thoughts don't shoot off into infinite space on a wild tangent.
We aim the heavy hammer, we hit the nail perfectly dead center on the head with our precision, and ultimately, we deploy our most sensory vocabulary to paint a beautiful, lingering picture in the mind's eye of our listener.
It is a profound realization when you step back and look at it as a whole. These phrases, drawing a blank, buying time, fleshing out, going off on a tangent, hitting the nail on the head, painting a picture.
They're more than just idioms.
Exactly. These are not just clever idioms to memorize so you can trick a Cambridge examiner. They represent the fundamental, underlying architectural framework of how native speakers conceptualize the very act of communication itself.
It is simultaneously a physical, structural, and artistic endeavor.
It really is. It changes the way you look at every conversation you have.
And it leaves me with one final deeply provocative thought that I want to leave you with today, directly inspired by everything we've just unpacked from the mechanics of this masterclass. We have spent this entire deep dive establishing that achieving the absolute highest, most elite level of native fluency heavily relies on deploying strategic illusions.
Right.
It relies on the deliberate use of meaningless filler phrases to buy time and cover up the moments when our brains completely crash and fail us.
The mastery of the graceful stumble.
Exactly. So if what we call native fluency is actually built on a foundation of these strategic illusions and recovery tactics, does that mean passing a massive gatekeeping C2 language exam is actually less about achieving a perfect, flawless, robotic mastery of the English dictionary and actually much more about mastering the universal, deeply human art of graceful imperfection?
That is the ultimate beautiful paradox of fluency.
Something for you to mull over the next time you find yourself desperately searching for a word spinning right on the tip of your tongue, whether you are in an exam room, a boardroom, or just at a coffee shop. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope you take these incredibly powerful metaphorical tools, these nuggets of knowledge, and use them to paint a picture in your very next conversation. Until next time, keep exploring.
So picture this. You're sitting in this heavily air-conditioned boardroom.
Oh yeah, the classic high-stakes scenario.
Exactly. The ambient hum of the ventilation is literally the only sound in the room. And across this massive mahogany table, a senior executive, or maybe a university examiner, just leans forward.
Right, steepling their fingers.
Yes, steepling the fingers. And they ask you to evaluate, say, the cascading macroeconomic consequences of global AI integration over the next 2 decades.
That's a massive question.
Massive. And you have roughly 3 seconds to open your mouth.
Which is terrifying.
It really is, because if you just recite a list of memorized facts, you are barely treading water. And if you panic and resort to these, simplistic binary answers, you just drown.
You completely lose the room.
Yeah, because your singular goal in this scenario isn't just to survive the question. It's to completely dominate the conversational landscape, right?
Yeah.
You want to establish an intellectual authority that just commands the room.
And that's incredibly difficult because the biological response to that exact scenario is usually a massive spike in cortisol.
Oh, like a literal stress response.
Exactly. I mean, your amygdala registers a threat. And the prefrontal cortex...
Wait, which part of the brain is that again?
Oh, it's the area responsible for nuance, right?
Yeah.
High-level executive function. It actually begins to shut down in favor of a fight-or-flight response.
Wow. So you physically cannot think straight.
Right. We are biologically hardwired to seek the path of least resistance when we're under pressure. So the brain desperately wants to offer a simple, absolute answer just to escape the tension of the moment.
Just to get it over with.
Exactly. It takes an incredibly disciplined communicator to override that neurological panic and, deploy advanced linguistic strategies instead.
Welcome to today's deep dive, because that discipline is exactly what we're unpacking today. That canyon-sized difference between basic competence and masterful fluency.
It really is a masterclass on the art of nuance that we're looking at.
It is. And to put it in a strategic context, having a foundational understanding of a complex topic, or just possessing basic language fluency, it's kind of like knowing how the pieces move on a chessboard.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, like, the knight moves in an L shape, right? The bishop is restricted to the diagonals.
Right, the absolute basics.
Yeah, and that baseline knowledge ensures you won't make an illegal move. You won't immediately embarrass yourself, but you definitely aren't going to win the game.
Not against a skilled opponent, no.
because a grandmaster isn't thinking about the basic rules of movement, They are playing an overarching strategy. They are conceptualizing how to outmaneuver the opponent, control the center of the board, and set psychological traps like 3 moves in advance.
Because the grandmaster is operating in a realm of abstraction. And the sources we're diving into today reveal that this strategic dominance requires a totally different set of tools.
Which is fascinating.
It is, because when you are operating at what linguists call the C2 level, which is absolute communicative mastery, you actually abandon rigid, literal vocabulary.
Why is that? Why wouldn't you just use more complex literal words?
Because literal vocabulary is too brittle. It literally shatters when applied to deeply complex, multifaceted realities. Instead, the expert communicator relies on this highly sophisticated arsenal of visual metaphors and idioms to map out their arguments.
Okay, I really want to examine the cognitive mechanics of that transition. Because why do novices default to seeing the world in black and white, while advanced communicators actively require these bizarre, highly specific, centuries-old idioms to articulate reality?
It's a great question.
Right. Like, why isn't a vast literal vocabulary enough to express complexity?
Well, it really comes down to the field of cognitive linguistics, specifically the framework pioneered by scholars like George Lakoff.
Okay, what did he find?
Basically, humans do not simply speak in metaphors. We actually think in them.
We think in metaphors.
Yes, because our brains evolved to navigate physical space, right? To hunt, to gather, to avoid predators, to physically grasp objects.
It's a very tangible physical thing.
Exactly. We did not evolve to instinctively comprehend abstract philosophical concepts like globalization or macroeconomic policy.
Or AI integration in the boardroom.
Right. So to process these massive invisible ideas, our brains literally have to hijack our motor cortex.
Wait, hijack the motor cortex. You mean the part of the brain that controls movement?
Exactly. We map abstract concepts onto physical experiences. We use idioms and metaphors because they anchor the invisible complexity of an argument into the physical, tangible world that our ape brains actually understand.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, they carry a density of information, a cultural and psychological weight that literal words just cannot match.
So that neurological hijacking is actually the perfect lens for our first concept today. Because before you can even begin to debate that AI question we posed at the start, your brain has to boot up and process the sheer scale of what is being asked.
You have to encounter the complexity before you can dissect it.
Yes. And the idiom our sources highlight for this exact moment of initial encounter is highly physical. It's the phrase, to wrap your head around it.
Oh, I love this one. It is a profound piece of spatial imagery.
It really is.
We conceptualize understanding as a physical act of grasping. If a concept is simple, say, the idea that water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius.
A basic fact.
Right. Your brain treats it like a small, smooth pebble. You can easily close your hand around it.
But a complex topic is a completely different shape.
Exactly. When confronted with a massive, highly irregular, constantly shifting concept, standard comprehension just fails. Your mind literally has to stretch, bend, and distort its own architecture to encompass the shape of the idea.
The visual that immediately comes to mind for me is a reticulated python encountering a meal that just defies its own anatomy.
Ah, that's a brilliant image.
Right. Like when a python attempts to consume something massive like a capybara, it cannot just bite and swallow.
No, it physically can't.
Right. It has to unhinge its own jaw, stretching its ligaments to the absolute breaking point, painfully forcing its biology to adapt to the scale of the object it's trying to ingest.
That is painfully accurate.
When a CEO drops a massive abstract problem on the table, I swear I feel my mental jaw unhinging to accommodate the sheer circumference of the topic.
It's a very visceral image, but let's actually push that Python analogy further, because the mechanics of it reveal a lot about conversational dynamics.
How so?
Well, the Python isn't just stretching, it is rendering itself completely vulnerable during the act of consumption.
Oh, because it's immobilized.
Exactly. It can't fight back or move quickly. And in a high-stakes conversation, admitting that you need time to wrap your head around a topic feels incredibly vulnerable.
Right, because your instinct is screaming at you to project immediate, impenetrable confidence.
Yes. The novice speaker will just swallow a smaller, simpler version of the question so they can spit out an answer immediately.
But the sources suggest that utilizing this specific phrase, actually saying out loud something like, the long-term ethical implications of this policy are incredibly difficult to wrap my head around, but my initial assessment is, That's actually considered a brilliant opening gambit.
It really is.
But why? Does admitting temporary cognitive failure really elevate your status in the room?
It absolutely does, because it shatters the illusion of naive competence.
Naive competence, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. If you instantly fire off a confident, bullet-pointed response to an impossibly complex question about the future of humanity, the seasoned experts in the room do not perceive you as a genius.
What do they perceive you as?
They perceive you as a rookie, someone who doesn't possess the situational awareness to realize how deep the water actually is.
Oh, wow. So you just look arrogant and ignorant.
Exactly. By stating that you are struggling to wrap your head around it, you are actively signaling intellectual humility.
You're telegraphing to the examiner or the board that you recognize the gravity of the topic.
Yes, and that you are treating their question with the profound respect it demands.
It fundamentally changes the power dynamic, doesn't it?
Completely.
You're taking a moment of internal panic and weaponizing it into a display of conversational maturity. And practically speaking, you also buy your prefrontal cortex 3 invaluable seconds to actually formulate a strategy.
Right, rather than just blurting out the first literal thought that comes to mind.
Exactly.
And in doing so, you establish a baseline of credibility. The listener now trusts your subsequent analysis because you have proven that you do not underestimate the complexity of the battlefield.
But, survival in that initial moment introduces a new, far more insidious danger.
Oh, the traps of oversimplification.
Yeah, you have unhinged your jaw, you've successfully stretched your mind around a massive topic, but now the clock is ticking, the board is waiting, and you have to actually articulate your stance.
And the immediate psychological temptation is to compress that massive complexity into a highly dense, easily communicable package.
Which introduces 2 distinct traps of generalization, starting with a behavior that will instantly destroy your credibility, which is the deployment of a sweeping statement.
Yes, the sweeping statement. In pragmatic terms, this is an absolute generalized claim that forcibly reduces a deeply complex ecosystem of variables into a single simplistic rule.
Give me an example of that.
Sure, like saying technology always alienates people from society, or free market capitalism solves all efficiency problems. Those are textbook sweeping statements.
Because they ignore all exceptions.
All exceptions, all historical context, and all subtle variations.
Now, the sources anchor this in a cleaning metaphor, which is so visual. It requires us to look at the collateral damage of the action.
Right, the factory floor.
Yes. Imagine a massive factory floor covered in a thick layer of dust and debris, right? And that represents the messy reality of a complicated sociological or economic issue.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
If your goal is simply to clean the floor as fast as humanly possible, you grab a massive, heavy-duty push broom, and you just put your back into it and aggressively shove everything across the room in one continuous motion.
And, the efficiency is undeniable. You clear the space.
You do. But the tragedy of the sweeping statement lies in what gets caught in the bristles.
Ah, the collateral damage.
Exactly. In your violent rush to clear the dust, you also sweep up a dropped diamond ring. You sweep up a stack of vital documents that fell off a desk. You sweep away all the intricate, highly valuable details that actually define the space.
They all get shoved into the exact same trash pile as the dirt.
Purely because the tool you selected was entirely too blunt for the job.
That is such a powerful way to frame it, because the broom is indiscriminate. It represents a fundamental carelessness regarding the truth.
Carelessness, right?
Yeah. When a speaker makes a sweeping statement in an academic or corporate setting, the experts listening immediately realize that the speaker just threw away the diamond ring.
They see the intellectual laziness.
Exactly. They recognize that the speaker either lacks the intellectual capacity to sort the valuable nuance from the noise, or worse.
That they're actively trying to manipulate the room by hiding the complexity.
Spot on. Now, compare that blunt destruction to the artistic alternative presented in the text, which is the act of painting with broad brushstrokes.
Okay, wait. On paper, that definition sounds suspiciously similar to a sweeping statement.
It does, but they are fundamentally different.
Because painting with broad brushstrokes involves looking at the big picture and deliberately omitting specific granular details, right?
Yeah.
Like, for instance, outlining the broad historical trends of the Industrial Revolution, but without detailing the specific daily wages of a 19th century textile worker.
Right, so the distinction lies entirely in intent and sequence. To really understand the difference, we have to transition from the janitorial metaphor to the artistic one.
Okay, so we're painters now.
Exactly. If you are a master painter commissioned to create a sprawling landscape, you do not begin by using a single hairbrush to paint the veins on a single leaf in the foreground.
No, of course not. You'd be there for years.
And you will lose the proportion of the entire canvas. You have to begin with a massive, wide paintbrush, the broad brush.
So you can establish the foundation.
Yes. This tool allows you to rapidly establish the foundational architecture of the piece. You paint the massive expanse of the blue sky, the dark suggestion of a distant mountain range, the general tonal wash of the ground.
But the physical nature of that wide brush makes it biologically impossible to render, say, the delicate reflection in a subject's eye.
And the artist knows that. That's the key. The advanced speaker knows that.
Oh, I see.
The critical divergence from the sweeping statement is the implicit promise made to the audience. The sweeping statement claims that the giant broom is the only tool that exists, and that the simplistic pile of dust is the entire truth. Whereas painting with broad brushstrokes is a deliberate conversational contract. Exactly. By using the phrase, "If I can paint with broad brushstrokes for a moment," you are openly acknowledging to the room that the granular details exist.
That they are vitally important.
Right, but that you are temporarily zooming out to establish the structural foundation of the argument before you switch to a finer brush.
Okay, let me introduce a point of friction here, though. Looking at the modern communication landscape.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because we are operating in an era completely dominated by algorithmic media, right?
No.
The 15-second video, the character-limited post, the hyper-partisan political soundbite on a 24-hour news network.
No, absolutely. The landscape is fractured.
Right. Our entire global infrastructure of information exchange financially rewards the giant broom.
It really does.
Nuance does not go viral. Absolute certainty and manufactured outrage do. So I have to ask, isn't the deployment of the sweeping statement, or at least the incredibly broad brush, an absolute necessity for survival today?
That's a very fair point.
Because if you start trying to paint the veins on the leaf, the audience just scrolls past you.
You are identifying the primary crisis of modern public discourse right there. The medium absolutely dictates the message.
Exactly.
And social media algorithms are designed to optimize for engagement, which is most easily triggered by the limbic system's response to absolute threats or absolute agreements.
The black and white binaries.
Right. However, we have to strictly define the arena we are discussing today. We are not talking about going viral on a timeline.
True, we're talking about high-stakes environments.
Yes. We are analyzing the boardroom, the university defense, the high-stakes diplomatic negotiation, and in those specific arenas, deploying a sweeping statement is an act of self-sabotage.
Because the people in those rooms are professionally incentivized to find the flaws in your argument.
Exactly that. A venture capitalist isn't going to hand over $50 million because you made a viral sweeping statement about market disruption.
So they're going to want the spreadsheets.
They are going to ruthlessly interrogate the specific mechanics of your business model. But your point about audience attention span actually validates why the broad brushstroke strategy is so brilliant.
How so?
Because even in a boardroom, cognitive load is a real constraint. If you begin a presentation on supply chain logistics with a hyper-specific data point about the fuel efficiency of a single cargo ship,
the board will completely tune you out.
Exactly. The human brain requires a schema, a mental framework, before it can file away specific data. The broad brushstroke builds the mental shelf.
Oh, I love that. And the subsequent nuance provides the books to fill it.
Exactly.
So it is entirely about the strategic sequencing of information.
Yeah.
You build the macro framework so the micro details actually have a place to live in the listener's brain.
Yes, sequencing is everything.
And once you've established that framework, you invariably invite opposition. Because if you refuse to rely on simplistic sweeping statements, you are forced to engage with the messy, contradictory reality of opposing viewpoints.
You inevitably step into what we can conceptualize as the courtroom of ideas.
The courtroom of ideas. That sounds intense.
It is where the conversational stakes become actively combative. When surrounded by conflicting perspectives, the advanced speaker requires specialized tools to rigorously test the structural integrity of the arguments being presented.
They must engage in intellectual stress testing.
Exactly.
And the most prominent tool in this arsenal is one of the most culturally embedded idioms we possess in English.
Playing devil's advocate.
Playing devil's advocate. We use it so casually today to describe someone taking a contrary position. But the historical architecture behind this phrase is incredibly profound.
The history is fascinating.
It really is. It traces directly back to a formal, institutionalized process within the Catholic Church.
I think the history here is paramount to understanding how the idiom actually functions in modern debate.
Let's unpack it.
So back in 1587, Pope Sixtus V formally established a specific office within the church.
Wait, it was a real official job.
A real salaried position. Because the institution recognized a fundamental flaw in human psychology. When a group of ideologically aligned individuals desperately want to believe something,
Like, say, the inherent holiness and perfection of a candidate for sainthood.
right, when they want that, they create a dangerous echo chamber. They will unconsciously ignore red flags, overlook past transgressions, and, blindly validate highly questionable miracles.
That's the ultimate confirmation bias.
Precisely. So, to counteract this biological tendency toward groupthink, the church appointed a highly trained canon lawyer to the official position of promoter fide.
Which was colloquially and famously known as the advocatus diaboli, the devil's advocate.
The devil's advocate. His sacred, legally mandated duty was to aggressively dismantle the case for canonization.
He literally had to attack the saint.
Yes, he was required to scour the candidate's history for evidence of fraud, sin, character flaws, or earthly motivations. He had to present the most skeptical, hostile interpretation of the candidate's life possible.
The fascinating paradox to me is that the man acting as the devil's advocate might personally revere the candidate.
Oh, absolutely. He might deeply desire the canonization to go through.
But he was required to actively attack the premise to ensure the final verdict was completely bulletproof.
Exactly. If the candidate's reputation could withstand the absolute worst the devil's advocate could throw at it, the resulting canonization was unassailable.
So, translating that historical rigor into modern conversational strategy, playing devil's advocate is the act of temporarily adopting an oppositional stance, even against an idea you fundamentally support.
Purely to stress test the structural integrity of the proposal.
Right. So imagine a corporate board unanimously thrilled about acquiring a smaller tech startup. The synergy looks perfect. The excitement in the room is palpable.
A master communicator will recognize the absolute danger of that echo chamber.
And they'll step in.
They will actively argue against the merger. They'll highlight potential culture clashes, hidden technical debt, or regulatory hurdles, essentially forcing the room to defend their optimism with hard data.
It's a controlled demolition of the argument to see what remains standing.
Exactly.
But we really have to address the extreme social liability of this maneuver.
Oh, the dinner party contrarian.
Yes. We have all encountered this individual, whether at a dinner party, in a university seminar, or on a project team. The person who has weaponized this concept into a core personality trait.
The chronic contrarian.
Right. The person who interrupts a highly productive conversation with, well, actually, let me play devil's advocate here, completely derailing the momentum and infuriating literally everyone in the room.
It's exhausting.
It is. So how does a masterful C2 speaker utilize this tool without being ostracized as a combative nuisance?
Well, the chronic contrarian fails because they lack diplomatic framing. They use the idiom as a shield for their own ego.
They just want to sound smart.
Right. They prioritize their desire to sound intelligent over the group's desire to find the truth. The linguistic key to avoiding this trap is to explicitly establish alignment before introducing friction.
You have to secure the perimeter before you detonate the charge.
Exactly. An advanced speaker will explicitly state their allegiance to the common goal before assuming the hostile posture.
What does that sound like in practice?
They will use a framing structure like, I am completely aligned with the strategic vision of this merger and I want to see it succeed. But to ensure we aren't walking into a blind spot, allow me to play devil's advocate for a moment regarding our integration timeline.
Oh, wow. That changes the entire tone.
Right. By stating the shared objective first, you neurologically disarm the listeners. You signal that the incoming attack is directed at the problem, not at the people presenting it.
It transforms the act from an ego-driven interruption into an act of communal intellectual service.
Beautifully put.
Now contrast that active combative stance with a maneuver that represents a highly strategic passive nuance. Because when the crossfire in that core room of ideas becomes too intense, the advanced speaker deploys the tactic of sitting on the fence.
Yes, sitting on the fence.
Which, on a surface level, implies neutrality, indecision, or a refusal to commit to one side of a binary argument.
And it is routinely deployed as a pejorative.
Totally. Politicians are accused of being fence-sitters when they refuse to take a hard stance on a polarizing issue, which implies cowardice or cynical calculation.
But let's actually dissect the spatial architecture of this metaphor.
Let's do it.
Imagine two neighbors who share a property line in a suburban neighborhood, and they are locked in a vicious, intractable dispute over a fundamentally binary issue.
Okay, I do.
The neighbor on the left is entrenched in their yard, absolutely convinced of their moral and factual superiority, screaming, "Yes!"
Right.
And the neighbor on the right is equally entrenched in their own yard, wielding their own set of facts, screaming, "No!"
The classic binary conflicts.
And the cognitive pressure of this conflict practically demands that you choose a yard. Human psychology craves binary resolution.
Because the cognitive load required to hold two opposing ideas in your mind simultaneously is exhausting.
It is. It is much easier to just pick a team, adopt their talking points, and go to war against the other side.
But the fence sitter rejects that biological urge. You have physically climbed up onto the wooden partition, dividing the two properties. You are perched directly in the middle, and your feet are adamantly refusing to touch the soil on either side.
You are marooned in the space between absolutes.
Right. So while society might view this as hesitation or cowardice, how does the advanced speaker actually utilize this as a tool of conversational dominance?
Because in a deeply complex scenario, premature commitment is an intellectual death sentence.
Wow, an intellectual death sentence.
Truly. If you are evaluating a profoundly nuanced issue, say the implementation of universal basic income, you're weighing its undeniable humanitarian benefits against the terrifying risk of hyperinflation.
Huge stakes.
Right. Jumping into either yard immediately blinds you to the validity of the opposing arguments. By consciously choosing to sit on the fence, you are claiming the high ground of intellectual objectivity.
You are enforcing a strategic suspension of judgment.
You are broadcasting to the room that both extremes contain fatal flaws. And until you have rigorously evaluated the totality of the evidence, you refuse to be bullied into a simplistic binary choice.
It's a demonstration of immense cognitive restraint.
Exactly. The novice rushes to an absolute conclusion to relieve the pressure. The master speaker tolerates the uncomfortable tension of the middle ground until the truth actually reveals itself.
But maintaining that high ground is incredibly precarious, isn't it?
Oh, very.
Because while you're sitting on that fence, the inhabitants of both yards are actively bombarding you with information. They are hurling statistics, moral appeals, historical precedents, highly biased studies at you, all in a desperate attempt to drag you down into their territory.
It's a crossfire.
Yeah. And to survive that crossfire without losing your balance, you must process that incoming data through an incredibly rigorous filter.
Because data without an epistemic filter is just noise.
Right.
Worse, it is often weaponized noise designed to manipulate your perception. This requires a specific mechanism for evaluating claims.
And the ultimate filter for this incoming barrage brings us to one of the most historically rich idioms in the English language.
Yeah.
When an advanced speaker is confronted with a dubious claim, they take it with a grain of salt.
Yes. Taking it with a grain of salt, or a pinch of salt, depending on where you're from.
Right. And in modern parlance, that means to view a piece of information with a healthy, calibrated degree of skepticism.
It means refusing to ingest a claim as absolute truth because you suspect the presence of underlying bias, hidden agendas, or just rampant exaggeration.
But the historical genesis of this phrase is utterly mind-blowing.
It really is incredible.
It originates from the ancient Roman world.
Yeah.
Specifically through the writings of the legendary scholar and military commander Pliny the Elder.
Ah, yes, Pliny.
Yeah, in his encyclopedic work, Historia Naturalis, Pliny recounts the discovery of a highly complex, secret recipe for an antidote to lethal poison.
And this wasn't metaphorical poison.
No, this was real, literal poison. This was the era of King Mithridates VI of Pontus, who famously spent his life ingesting small amounts of toxins to build immunity, a practice known as Mithridatism.
Crazy to think about.
Totally crazy. And this antidote recipe contained a bizarre concoction of dried walnuts, figs, and rue leaves. But Pliny specifically noted a crucial caveat. For this antidote to be safe for human consumption, for it to successfully neutralize the venom without killing the patient, it required the addition of a single literal grain of salt.
Addito salis grano.
Exactly. The cognitive leap from physical toxicology to intellectual defense is a masterpiece of linguistic evolution.
It really is. The literal survival tactic of the Roman Empire morphed into the conversational survival tactic of the modern boardroom.
The visual mapping here is just so intense. When someone in a negotiation presents you with a highly favorable, completely unverified statistic designed to force your hand, they're essentially handing you a cup of poison wine.
That's exactly what they're doing. And if you swallow that statistic whole, the toxic bias infects your entire argument. Your logic becomes compromised and your credibility just dies on the table. But your skepticism, your deeply ingrained critical thinking, is that grain of salt.
You neutralize it.
By applying that localized skepticism, you neutralize the toxic elements of the claim. You extract whatever minor factual truth might be buried inside the exaggeration while protecting your intellectual integrity from the poison.
You are curing intellectual deception with Roman chemistry. I love that.
That's a great tool.
And once you have successfully filtered that incoming data, once you have neutralized the bias, maintained your balance on the fence, and synthesized the truth, you transition from the defensive to the offensive.
You shift gears.
Right. You cease being the consumer of information and become the provider. You take action to shed light on the subject.
To shed light on an issue is the act of supreme clarification.
It's illumination.
Yes. It is taking a topic that is hopelessly tangled, deeply confusing, or deliberately obscured, and providing an explanation so lucid and structurally sound that the confusion instantly evaporates.
Like a history professor mapping the absurdly complex web of 19th century treaties that triggered the First World War in a way that suddenly makes perfect, tragic sense.
Exactly. The metaphorical architecture of illumination plays directly on human evolutionary biology.
How so?
Well, for hundreds of thousands of years, the dark was the most dangerous environment a human could experience.
That's where the predators hide.
Exactly. It's where our spatial awareness is completely stripped away. So imagine standing in the pitch-black subterranean basement of an unfamiliar building.
Okay, I'm terrified already.
You're surrounded by massive, ambiguous shapes. You are hesitant to move because every step results in a painful collision with an unseen object.
The psychological state is one of profound anxiety.
Anxiety, paralysis, and ignorance. And then the master communicator walks down the stairs carrying a brilliantly bright, steady lantern. The instant they raise that lantern, the physical reality of the room is revealed. The terrifying, ambiguous shapes are instantly categorized as harmless old furniture and stacked boxes.
The evolutionary anxiety just completely vanishes because the brain finally has the visual data required to map its environment.
Exactly. And the collective sigh of relief in that basement mirrors the exact atmospheric shift in a boardroom when a C2 speaker finally takes a massive, convoluted problem and distills it into absolute clarity.
They are the lantern bearer.
They are. The ambient tension in the room drops. The intellectual paralysis is broken because reality has been exposed.
The progression between those two idioms outlines the complete life cycle of high-level knowledge processing.
It really does. First, you ingest potentially toxic, chaotic information, surviving by neutralizing it with your critical grain of salt.
Right.
And having processed that information safely, you undergo a transformation. You empower yourself to hold the lantern, shedding light and dispelling the dark confusion for everyone else in the room who lacks your analytical capacity.
But that transition from survival to illumination raises a massive ethical consideration regarding the role of the advanced communicator.
It does. The ethics of expertise.
Yeah. Once you have done the grueling work, once you have stretched your mind to wrap your head around the complexity, painted the landscape with broad brushstrokes, survived the devil's advocate, and filtered the poison, is it your inherent intellectual responsibility to shed light for others?
That is the big question.
Do you have a fundamental obligation to transition from personal comprehension to public education? Or is it acceptable to just sit quietly in the dark with your lantern, protecting your own advantage?
That is the defining philosophical friction of expertise.
Because knowledge is power, right?
It is. But from a purely functional standpoint, progress within any system, whether it's a multinational corporation, a university faculty, or a democratic society, it relies entirely on shared understanding.
So you can't just hoard it.
No. If you hoard the lantern and refuse to shed light, you are consciously forcing everyone around you to stumble blindly in the dark.
Which might give you a temporary edge.
It might give you a cynical advantage for a minute, sure. But the structural reality is that eventually their blind stumbling will cause them to crash into you.
Oh, wow. Their ignorance inevitably becomes your operational liability.
Precisely. The true apex of conversational mastery isn't merely possessing the right answer. It is the diplomatic, patient ability to guide others out of the dark without making them feel humiliated by their previous blindness.
It requires a profound degree of intellectual generosity.
Intellectual generosity. I really like that phrase.
And that concept forms the perfect foundation for our final exploration today. Because once you have navigated the entirety of this metaphorical battlefield, what is the ultimate objective?
What's the goal?
Right. When the boardroom meeting adjourns, when the examiner turns off the recording device, what is the intended legacy of your effort? It's about the lingering, transformative impact you leave in the architecture of the listener's mind.
You achieve this by serving them food for thought.
Food for thought. Idiomatically, giving someone food for thought means presenting an idea, a perspective, or a piece of data that is so deeply compelling and complex that the listener is forced to continue analyzing it long after the physical conversation has ended.
Like the realization of the staggering invisible tonnage of microplastics currently circulating in the oceanic food web.
Exactly.
Right.
Or grasping the subtle, long-term psychological erosion caused by a decade of remote work. It is an idea with gravitational pull.
And we have to analyze the neurobiology behind this culinary metaphor because comparing information to food is arguably the most accurate representation of how the human brain processes reality.
We use the terminology constantly.
We do. We consume media, we go on information diets, we binge television shows.
The brain requires high-quality structural input to build its models of the world, exactly as the body requires protein to build muscle.
Spot on. And if we trace that biological mapping, we can categorize the different types of communicative input.
Let's do that.
If an idea is entirely shallow, derivative, or purely sensationalistic, like the careless sweeping statements we discussed earlier, it functions as the intellectual equivalent of hyper-processed junk food.
A massive family-sized bag of artificial potato chips.
Precisely. You can consume a staggering amount of it incredibly quickly because it requires absolutely zero mechanical effort to chew.
And zero cognitive effort to process.
Right. It triggers a momentary dopamine hit. But it is fundamentally devoid of nutritional density.
An hour after consuming it, the novelty wears off, you have completely forgotten the experience, and your brain is basically starved for actual sustenance.
Exactly. But the ideas generated by the metaphorical toolkit we have explored today, the nuanced, multifaceted, deeply stress-tested arguments, they are the complete opposite.
They are a heavy, complex, multi-course culinary experience.
They are a dense, nutrient-rich meal. You cannot simply inhale a complex philosophical argument or a massive macroeconomic strategy.
And choke on it.
You have to actively break it down, you have to cut it into manageable pieces, chew on the implications slowly, and really engage with the texture of the argument.
And most importantly, after you consume it, your body undergoes a physiological shift.
You literally need to sit quietly on the couch for an hour, because your internal systems require dedicated time and energy to digest the heavy material you just ingested.
That delayed digestion is the ultimate triumph of C2 level communication.
It really is the pinnacle.
Because communication at this tier is not about the robotic, immediate transfer of data points from my hard drive to your hard drive. If I just want to give you data, I'll email you a spreadsheet.
Exactly.
Masterful communication is about providing structural nourishment that fundamentally alters the lens through which the receiver views reality.
If I give you genuine food for thought, I have effectively planted a seed in your subconscious.
Right. When you are driving home in silence or staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m., your brain is still involuntarily working on my idea. I have successfully occupied your mental real estate.
That is the true definition of intellectual influence. You haven't just spoken to them. You have changed the trajectory of their internal monologue.
Which is incredibly powerful. And I actually want to challenge you, the listener, directly on this point, pushing the dietary analogy to its logical conclusion.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because if we review the conversational ecosystem we've mapped out today, we can clearly identify the nutritional value of our daily inputs.
We can see what we're eating, intellectually speaking.
Right. The sweeping statements, the partisan outrage, the context-free sound bites, that is the drive-through fast food of modern discourse.
It's cheap, it's aggressively marketed, and it's designed for thoughtless, rapid consumption.
But true nuance, the grueling effort required to wrap your head around a shifting paradigm, the deliberate artistry of painting with broad brush strokes, the historical discipline of the devil's advocate, and the skepticism of the grain of salt, that is a Michelin-star dining experience.
It requires immense preparation from the chef and active, engaged appreciation from the diner.
Exactly. So you need to evaluate your own daily information diet. Look at the podcasts you queue up, the algorithmic feeds you scroll, the nature of the debates you engage in at work. Are you perpetually binging on intellectual junk food?
Are you constantly reaching for the cheap dopamine of sweeping statements?
Or are you actively seeking out the heavy, complex meals that force you to sit down, shut out the noise, and do the agonizing work of digestion?
And the stakes of that self-evaluation are massive. A prolonged diet composed entirely of intellectual junk food doesn't just make you temporarily lazy, it induces chronic cognitive lethargy.
Your brain literally loses the stamina required to process complexity.
Your mental jaw physically forgets how to unhinge. You lose the foundational conversational agility that separates the grandmaster from the novice.
That is a terrifying thought.
Yeah.
So let's synthesize the sprawling linguistic architecture we have reconstructed today.
Let's do a recap.
We began by acknowledging the intense biological and cognitive effort required to stretch our minds and wrap our heads around massive alien concepts, defying the instinct to panic.
And then we identified the destructive nature of the giant broom, learning to avoid the collateral damage of sweeping statements.
Right, opting instead to strategically organize reality by painting with broad brushstrokes.
We stepped into the crossfire of the courtroom of ideas, engaging the 16th century rigor of the Catholic Church's devil's advocate to ruthlessly stress test our assumptions.
While maintaining the psychological discipline to sit on the fence and suspend our judgment when confronted with false binaries.
We protected our intellectual integrity by curing the poison of toxic bias with an ancient Roman grain of salt.
A defense mechanism that empowered us to step into the darkness as the lantern bearer, shedding light on reality for those trapped in confusion.
And finally, we recognize that the ultimate enduring goal of all this effort is to transcend the mere transfer of facts, serving our audience a dense, transformative meal of food for thought.
The metaphorical toolkit we have unpacked today is the exact arsenal deployed by grandmasters in university defense seminars, high-stakes diplomatic negotiations, and the most intense corporate boardrooms.
By integrating these cognitive frameworks, you move far beyond the baseline survival of treading water.
You transition into a state of absolute, undeniable intellectual dominance. But before we conclude, the source material asks us to reflect on our relationship with nuance.
It does.
Because we have spent this entire deep dive practically canonizing the concept of nuance, right? Praising the profound restraint required to sit on the fence, to view every angle, and to play devil's advocate against our own beliefs.
We've made nuance the hero of the story.
Exactly. But I want to leave you with a final, highly unsettling piece of food for thought.
What's that?
What happens when an entire global society decides to sit on the fence regarding a rapidly accelerating existential threat?
Oh, wow.
Consider the looming, irreversible thresholds of artificial general intelligence, or the cascading systemic collapse threatened by global climate change.
When the stakes are literally survival.
Right. In the face of a burning house, can the relentless academic pursuit of perfect nuance and the constant desire to play devil's advocate against every proposed solution eventually devolve into a highly sophisticated intellectual excuse for total paralysis?
That's a chilling thought.
Is there a critical breaking point where the master communicator must willingly drop the broad paintbrush, abandon the fence, pick up a bucket of water, and finally possess the courage to make a sweeping statement? We will leave you to digest that on your own.